The Bengals are favored this week, and well, hello and welcome into Off the Bench here. It is a Wednesday morning. It's Cincinnati's first sports talk show. And that, yes, I think it's well understood that it's the first in the morning. We weren't the first. We didn't come up with the idea of sports talk in the Queen City. But here we are. Reed Mouse, Trace Fowler. Trace Fowler had a long night talking about the Cincinnati Reds, and they got a big win.
They did.
And a guy that you are quick to throw some shade at, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's more than fair to say you throw some shade at Tyler Stevenson, but he comes through in the ninth inning.
I definitely sometimes feel like the I don't know, the fan base perhaps overvalues or says that Tyler Stevenson's worth more than he actually is. I will openly admit that some of that's probably due to just availability. We can always use the old bit, your best ability is availability bit.
Sure.
But I mean, I don't think he's not been healthy, and secondarily to that, I don't think he's developed that well. I don't think he's progressed to the liking of, and that's what most of the fandom comes down to, is what your expectations are of a player at some point in their career. Do they live up to those expectations? And then how do you feel about them? And more times than not, if you have someone that you hold to a high expectation, well, then it's maybe not totally fair to them. But, yeah, I guess I had high expectations for Tyler Stevenson when you seen him come up, and I felt like he was a really, really good player. And I feel like he's not gotten a whole lot better, to be honest.
Well, that's part of the thing about Tyler Stevenson is he was billed probably the first guy during the rebuild, right? Like when the Reds decided, hey, we're going to scrap this thing down, we're going to rebuild it. He was kind of the one centerpiece at that time. But like, all right, Tyler Stevenson, he's already played a little bit in the MLB, and he's had flashes to show that he might be something special. And obviously, it's at a premier position that, if you get a good catcher, you're so far ahead of the 8 ball. So that's why I think fans are a little more sentimental to him, because you were told 5 years ago this was going to be a centerpiece of the team going forward. But he comes up with a big hit last night. Is that his biggest play of the year? Is that his biggest swing of the year? Is this the biggest moment?
It's hard to know over 162, but yeah, I don't see how it couldn't be at least right there, if not the top moment of Tyler Stevenson's season. I don't know. The Reds are an interesting spot. Let's be honest. The only real reason that the Reds are continuing to find life, as we call it, is because the Mets have been completely inept. They have fallen apart. They have been ripping at the seams. They have been butting at the seams, and they are busting at this point at the seams. The Mets are a weird bunch, because they could go off, they could rattle 8 or 9 wins off in a row, and it doesn't really matter how the Reds play from here moving forward, because the Mets just took care of business. It feels like that's definitely possible for the Mets, but it doesn't seem like that's probable at this point. I've said it all along. I think that we downplay, as some Reds fans seemingly do right now, the notion that there's other teams in the mix here. I mean, the Giants are ahead of the Reds. And I know, I get on here and I feel like people are like, oh, this is so pessimistic. I mean, they got a big win last night. It's like, I'm not being pessimistic. I'm being realistic. And maybe realistic isn't fun as a Cincinnati Reds sports fan at times, because more times than not, that leads to bad taste in your mouth or bad feelings. But I don't like sugarcoating things. I'm not going to sit up here and be like, oh, man, yeah, I mean, they find a way to win today, and then they can rattle off a few, and I don't know, they play in Sacramento. Where the hell the A's play at this point? Who knows? But the Athletics of who knows where.
Northern Cal.
Maybe they can rattle off 3 wins against them, and then you're feeling good. I don't want to say that the Reds don't have a chance at all. Of course they have a chance. But very much of the same issues that this team has had all year long happened again last night. I mean, they had 2 runs heading into the 9th inning. And the 2 runs, by the way, came off the bats of guys that don't ever play or don't get opportunities to play. Will Benson, and yes, I guess Sal Stewart just got up here, but he starts at a 50% clip. So I don't know if you want to consider that playing a lot or not. I don't know. But if you're a top prospect coming up and you seemingly could help the one thing that this team struggles with, I don't know. It seems like you would play a little bit more. But good to see Sal Stewart hit another home run. Good to see Tyler Stevenson, like you said. I'm happy for Tyler Stevenson that he hit a big home run. And you know what? I'm a man enough to admit this. Do I think that if you had a course of 162 and you could say, hey, who's the better player, Tyler Stevenson or Jose Trevino? Yeah, obviously it's Tyler Stevenson. Yeah. That's the obvious answer. My point all along with the Trevino-Stevenson thing is this. Trevino is playing really good, like really good baseball. And then Stevenson comes back, and he's anointed the starting position, and he plays there for weeks on end, and then Trevino has to take a back seat. He obviously, at some point, would have probably cooled off regardless. I'm not naive to that. But at the same time, this whole huge delta that some would act like that the Reds had between Tyler Stevenson and Jose Trevino, I never seen it. And that's kind of where I think most of maybe some people think my Tyler Stevenson hate comes from. It's not so much that I think that Tyler Stevenson doesn't have value. Of course he does. But how much value based off of what the perception is of the fan base, I don't know. I'm not totally sold on the idea that Tyler Stevenson is a cornerstone foundational piece to a good baseball team. I think he's a good player at his position, but I don't think you're going to go out and be like, yeah, let's build around him like at one time everybody said they would. And sadly, that's what happens in this town is we get a couple prospects or someone that comes up. Yeah. We're not a very good team, so you got to latch on to something, and then you latch on to these prospects, and guess what happens? You get, I guess your expectations get a little too high, and then you get let down. Ellie's having for all intents and purposes, not a terrible season, but if you ask most Reds fans how Ellie's season has gone, they're going to tell you that it's been a bad season. And the only reason they're going to say that is because of the expectations that came in with Ellie De La Cruz and what he's been able to produce this year. So that's the nuts and bolts of it right now. I mean, listen, if they find a way to win today, they'd be stealing a win. And I was looking at the schedule this morning, so obviously that means that I don't think that they're all the way out.
Yeah.
They're going to have to. They're probably going to have to go 7 games over 500 the rest of the way, which is 12-5. And
need some help. And you're still probably going to need some help there too, right?
I don't think so. I think if they go 12-5, I think they get to enough wins to where they would be competitive, because I think that they have the tiebreaker over the Mets, which helps significantly. That basically is a half-game swing, and then you have, I guess. I'm hopeful that the Giants, over the next 7 games against the Dodgers in the next 2 weeks, they kind of not fall apart, but they certainly don't play the same winning baseball that they have been.
The Giants are hilarious because there was a graphic that came out about 3 weeks ago about ever since the Rafael Devers trade to that point in the season, the best record in baseball was the Boston Red Sox since the Rafael Devers trade, and the worst record in baseball was the San Francisco Giants, and ever since then the Giants have been on an absolute tear. So you brought up a couple points about Tyler Stevenson that I kind of want to get your opinion on. Obviously, years ago he was deemed a cornerstone of this team going forward. Yeah. And you don't think that might not be the case? You don't think that he's certainly a cornerstone? Do you think the Reds should go and get somebody else at the catcher position, or do you think he's serviceable enough and there's other holes to fill going forward, looking into next year and beyond?
It all depends on where the direction of this team lies. I think that if they're going to sit here and tell me that they're going to do pitching, defense, then, well, it seems to me that they probably should invest a little bit more in certain positions at the defensive level, especially if they're going to get the production offensively that they have gotten. Tyler Stevenson, to me, at this point, is serviceable enough. I'm not going to sit here and act like you have to go out there and find a new catcher, but and I hope I'm proven wrong. I just don't think that he's an impactful piece that's going to make what I would think a considerable difference over the course of 162, because I don't think he's also going to be probably available for 162. And we'll leave it at that. I don't want to sit here and make this like a Tyler Stevenson bash session, because ultimately
you don't need a catcher to play 162 games.
I'm not. Well, when I say over the course of 162, we can't go stretches of months where we're missing time or we got to fit. Like with and again, maybe I'm being overly critical, but every team that I've watched that has dominated this division, Reed, has had a damn good catcher, and we want to sit here and act like it is like I watched Molina carry the Cardinals to playoffs year after year after year, and you can say whatever you want. I'm not. Should I be comparing Stevenson to Molina? No. But you have Contreras as well
William
now,
Contreras
who's absolutely dominating this division.
Wilson Contreras when the Cubs were good.
The reality is that we don't have that. We don't have that. We can act like we do. We can say that Tyler Stevenson's that type of player, but you'd be lying to yourself if you think that. But is he serviceable enough? Yeah, probably if he had a great team around him. But again, we can keep going down this domino. Is Steer serviceable enough at first base if you had a great team around him? Of course he probably is. You could probably hide that to a certain extent. Is Ellie serviceable enough? Of course he is, if you have a great team around him. But all of these guys combined make up a mid-baseball team. And that's where we're stuck right now, offensively, to be clear. The pitching is a whole different story. And that's, to be honest, that's the thing that's crazy to me, is that the pitching has been so damn good that it has allowed a portion of this fan base to act like the offense or the position players, it's not as big of a deal. I got news for you. If the Reds would have went out and they had a poor offense or poor pitching performance this year, and they're on pace to win 68, 69, 70, 71 games, we'd have a huge problem in this town about almost everybody that plays a position. But since the pitching has saved their you-know-what, it's not as big of a deal. These guys are somewhat serviceable. Maybe we can make this work. Maybe they got a little bit of an injury, and that's why they're not playing well. Well, maybe so. But the difference between what the Reds are from a position player standpoint and what they produce consistently versus what a good team in the playoff does is light years ahead. They're not even relatively close. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of guys that go out and golf that shoot 79s, right? And they're good. Like, oh, man, that's not bad. And then someone goes out and shoots a 69, and they say, well, that's only 10 strokes. Well, you know what? 10 strokes is a massive amount of strokes. Might not be to the actual casual, because, one day you might say that seems like a delta you can get to, but it's not even really close. And maybe 10 strokes is too much. Maybe it's more like 5 strokes where you can be like, well, if you take that hole away and this hole away or those holes reverse, we'd be there. But that's not how golf works, and that's not how baseball works. 5, 6, 7 games is a pretty considerable difference.
No doubt.
If the Reds were up 4 games right now, we'd be talking about the playoffs. We wouldn't even be considering missing the playoffs.
And to carry on your analogy with golf, the difference between shooting, if you're talking 10 strokes, the difference between a 99 and an 89 is different than 79 to 69. The skill gap between those two separates are vastly different. 100%. I will push back on your Jose Trevino delta and what you were getting out of Jose Trevino here in the second half. Jose Trevino, his OPS in the second half is
We're talking about the second half. I'm not talking about the second half. I'm not talking about the second half. I'm talking about the very beginning of the year. Once you go to the first 2 months of the season, and then all of a sudden Trevino sits. I'm not talking about the second half when Stevenson comes back from his thumb injury from whatever it was. We're talking about 2 different stints. But Tyler Stevenson was hurt at the beginning of the year.
Right.
And he also was hurt in the second half, too. I get it. It's kind of hard to differentiate when Tyler Stevenson's available and not available. I understand. Sure. It's multiple different times.
In the last 2.5 months, Jose Trevino has 3 extra base hits as a hitter. So
I'm completely aware. Okay. But let's not act like Tyler Stevenson's a world beater either. Are we going to? Is that what we want to do? Is that what we want to do today? Do we want to sit here and act like Tyler Stevenson's been ripping the cover off the ball because he hits 1 ball over the fence yesterday? He hit 2 over the fence, to be fair to him, though. Hey, listen, Tyler Stevenson is not a bad player. I'm just tired of hearing about how he's, a Contreras and or a Molina, and maybe no one's doing that. But it's it's a bit tired, I guess, for me.
Well, the thing that I always want to talk about, I remember sitting here when Tom used to host the show, and I was arguing about Hall of Fame candidacies or something on a day, and we were talking about Joe Mauer, and he started bringing up Dave Parker's stats compared to Joe Mauer, and I was like, well, Joe Mauer was a catcher, so catchers do get graded on a curve offensively. You brought up guys like Spencer Steer, and I don't have Spencer Steer's Tyler Stevenson stats in front of me, but I can almost guarantee that Tyler Stevenson ranks higher amongst catchers in terms of offensive output than Spencer Steer does as a first baseman, simply because you are graded on a bit of a curve. Sure. And a lot of people, I think there's a lot of teams, I said this yesterday, a good way to gauge what you have as a team is would other teams want what I have?
That's a great point.
And I think a lot of teams in Major League Baseball would gladly take Tyler Stevenson. I don't think
as their starting catcher.
Yes.
If they make the postseason, how many postseason teams would actually take Tyler Stevenson? Legitimately, how many teams that are good enough to possibly do anything in the playoffs would gladly take Tyler Stevenson?
I can speak as a Cubs fan. Carson Kelly's having a much better season than Tyler Stevenson. I would take Tyler Stevenson going forward over Carson Kelly because what you got is kind of a sham with Carson Kelly. You know what you got is kind of a sham there. So I think a lot of teams.
Well, that's a good thing because Tyler Stevenson's very good at that role. He's good at coming in for guys that are sham. that are playing well, by the way, that are playing better than he has.
I think there's a lot of teams that would gladly take Tyler Stevenson, and I don't think that's the case for a lot of players on the Reds roster, at least out in the field.
Well, to be fair, let me say this. Right now in my life, the way that it is, I don't have enough time to watch every single team and know how good their offense or how good their catcher is and whether or not I would trade them for them. But when I think about some of the better teams in this league, I don't think that I don't think that they're even considering trading who they have at catcher to what the Reds have at catcher. And again, he hit a huge home run last night.
Yeah.
Let me be very clear. Yeah. This isn't me trying to be like, I can't stand the guy, blah, 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 blah. It's just more or less the pedestal that we put players on in this town at times seems to be a little too high. It seems to be a little too high. And you know what's funny is that we more or less sometimes criticize the guys that actually are, more or less producing at a high enough level that you can play meaningful baseball. I am thankful that we have gotten to a point now where we don't bring up Hunter Green's contract. That's nice. Nobody's brought that up. Remember how that was a terrible contract? Remember how we overpaid for that? Remember how he's done nothing in his career to deserve those type of guaranteed money? Well, Nick Krall hasn't won a lot, if any, but he did win that deal. And again, another guy, though, to be fair, if I'm going to criticize Tyler Stevenson for his inconsistency of being healthy, another guy that's been somewhat unhealthy. But the thing about Hunter Green is at least when he comes back, he's elite. He's top 5 pitcher in the sport, if not the best pitcher in the sport at times. So
Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt about it. It is interesting. We're just kind of thinking about the catcher position, and I mentioned how they are kind of graded on a curve because offensively, catching position has not, in the history of baseball, it's not been a great offensive output, similar to like a second base. I am interested to see with kind of the advances in the game on how the kind of role, because for the longest time, if you got a guy that could block and handle pitchers very well and could receive and all that stuff, that was more important than getting a good hitter. A guy that has a cannon and can keep runners off the base pass, that was more important than a good hitter. But now we are heading into an era which they don't need a frame. They're probably in a couple of years because there's just going to be an automatic strike zone. It doesn't matter where he catches it. It's all going to be about where it crosses the plate. We're getting to an era where a lot of pitchers are calling their own pitches because there's pitch comm and stuff like that. And we're going to get to an era where the position as a whole is going to drastically change to where are we just going to start throwing guys back there that just have cannons. And that's all they have to do because they just got to block the ball and they've got to have a cannon because everything else is done by the pitcher or done by a robot, and you don't have to worry about that. So I'm interested to see where the catching position goes in Major League Baseball in the next few years. All right, so we talked about this a bit yesterday, and I think it's somewhat important to bring up. This is our last Off the Bench with me and Trace this week. Stone Shield Show will be up later right after this, and he'll continue to have his shows throughout the rest of the week. But our last show will be today. So I wanted to talk about this game going forward, this game on Sunday between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Cincinnati Bengals are
Why do you call them the Jaguars?
So
where's that come from?
Okay, so
is that like the Danka thing or whatever when you
Donka?
Donka?
No, it's so British people.
Okay,
they pronounce Jaguars Jaguar. Like they pronounce it as it's spelled.
You also have some people in the chat that are very frustrated with you. I know I'm going to keep going on the side rails here. Very frustrated with you by the way you say Bengals.
Bengals?
Yeah, it's Bengals with an E.
Oh no. It's not Ben. It's Bay. Bengals.
Okay.
Because I don't know if I'm right, but it frustrates me when I hear guys like Casey calls them the Bengals. Other people that I know call them the Stone.
The Bengals.
How do you pronounce the football team in Cincinnati? Bengals.
Say it again.
Bengals, not Bengals.
Yeah.
Oh, so
he's on our team.
You're on Bengals.
Yeah, he's on the team that actually pronunciates it right. But anyways, keep going with the Jaguars. I'm sorry, I really got this show off.
No, you're right.
Here.
It's off the rails. So
yeah, off the rails, off the bench.
British people pronounce it with all the vowels, Jaguars, and we in America call it Jaguars. And so I just started Jaguars. I don't know, just started being a bit when I was on the show a couple years ago. So they're 3.5-point favorites, and it is paramount. We've talked about it now for the last 3 years, how paramount it is for the Bengals to get going early. Everyone in the world knows that the Bengals like to start slow. And if you look ahead, if you look past just this week, they get the week 1 win against the Cleveland Browns. They got another game where they're going to be favored by more than a field goal, which is a pretty good margin in the NFL. You look at the next 4, even 5 weeks, and the Bengals might not be favored in a single one of those games. Stone, go ahead and flash the graphic up when you get a chance. But the Bengals they'll go to Minnesota next week after they play Jacksonville. They'll go to Denver. They'll take on the number 1 seed from the NFC last year, the Detroit Lions. Then they'll go to who some people say are the best team in football, the Green Bay Packers. And then they bring home Pittsburgh Steelers the week after that. So their next 5 games, you'll be lucky to go 3-2 out of. You'll be lucky, especially the next 4 games, you'll be lucky to get 2 wins out of that. So it is so paramount for the Cincinnati Bengals to get a win this week, because if you don't, you go into that 4-game stretch at 1-1. You could be coming out of week 6 looking at 2-4. You could be looking out of week 6 at, even 1-5, which then you just chalk up the season and you whisper it goodbye. If you win this game, it doesn't matter. Obviously, you got to win a game. You got to win 2 games, even 3 games to keep everything you want to keep ahead. But you're able to get through this next 4-game stretch after this week if you're able to win this. And you're able to keep your season alive because the Bengals have come out of a deficit in previous years to obviously make the postseason or at least be in competition at the end of the year. And then once again, at the end of the year, there's 3 games that the Bengals should win. So if you look at the middle part of the schedule, it's crunch time. in that middle part, and they just got to get a win this week, I think. I think that's where I'm at.
I think you're overvaluing some of these teams. We do this every single year in the NFL. We take the previous history of what they've been and the last year, and we assume that they're going to be a good team, and then all of a sudden, they don't have nearly as good of a year. The Detroit Lions, again, I'm not here to suspect or act like they're not going to be a serviceable team. They are. Are they as good of a team as they were last year? I don't think so. I think they lost a lot of pieces, and
they lost both coordinators, which obviously is a big thing.
You brought up how big of a role do coaches play, and do you think how much value do they actually have? Listen, I do think that when you lose, both of your coordinators, it's going to, if nothing else, you can convince me it's going to take some time to get back on track. So you have a home game against them. I like to think that you more or less would be favored against the Lions. I could be wrong, but I'd like to think that you would be. At Denver, I get it. It's at Mile High. But it's a primetime game, right?
Monday Night Football.
I think that also bodes well, in my opinion, when you have to travel somewhere because you have a little bit of extra time. You also have a situation where I just think that the stakes are raised a little bit. And maybe I'm crazy for thinking this, but if you had to go to Denver and play a 1 o'clock game, or what is a proverbial 1 o'clock game out there? I think it's a 4 o'clock game here. But the reality is that it just kind of like mixed in with the rest of the NFL. Maybe you could convince me that it's a little bit more of a difficult game. But you give Joe Burrow, you give that offense a chance to shine on Monday Night Football, I think it's a little bit of a different story. So I like to think, that's a pick 'em. I could be completely wrong on that. You keep saying 2-4. I think 500 at minimum is very realistic. I know that's only
if they get through this week and those next 4 games or next 5 games that they'd play after that, 4 of the 5 are against teams that were playoff teams a year ago.
Right.
And the only team that didn't make the postseason looks like one of the best teams in the league, and that's the Green Bay Packers. So that's where it's just to be in a playoff team in the NFL, you're going to have to beat good teams. That's just you can't just coast through the league. You're not going to get a favorable schedule more often than not. You're going to play tough teams, and you're going to have to beat tough teams. And if the Bengals want to have aspirations that we think that they should have with Joe Burrow, then they're going to have to beat good teams. I'm just looking at the realistic nature of, you win this game against Jacksonville, you give yourself a little bit of leeway to have a bad game against Detroit at home, or going to Minnesota, who won 14 games last year, and that's going to be a tough game.
No, they all count, right? I mean, that's the beauty of the beast. They all count. I mean, it's not like if you go and you get blown out by the Packers by 40 points, which I'm not suggesting that's going to happen, by the way, to be clear. But if that were to happen, obviously there's a sour taste in your mouth. But like you said, you win a field goal game against the Jaguars versus losing a field goal game versus the Jaguars. Well, it's a completely different scenario on how you have an outlook for the season moving forward. The good news is you keep bringing up these next 4 or 5 games. After that, though, you got the Jets, you got the Bears, you got a bye week, you got Pittsburgh, and then you got the Patriots. So it's then you got a little bit of a tough stretch after that. I get, but
right.
Hey, how many wins does it take to get the postseason? 9, 10 wins.
10. 9 hasn't gotten the last 2 years.
So 10. Let's just call it 10 wins. You start 2-0. That gives you a pretty good chance moving forward. And the
last 3 games are Dolphins, Cardinals, Browns. So you got to think
you already stole a game. I mean, that's the beautiful thing.
So
you already stole a game. You stole a game in Cleveland on the road. That you, when you look back at the end of the year, you ask yourself, which games you might have gone either way. You already won one of those.
Yeah, no, that's the good part. When I'm, I think I've.
Why are you so pessimistic on this 2-4 stuff? Why you keep doing
I'm
that?
always the optimistic guy, but for some reason I can't shake pessimism this year.
Did you watch that they got 7 yards of total offense in the second half of the football game?
Well, that's where if you want to be optimistic, we asked ourselves last year, you lose to the Ravens the 2 ways that they did last year, and they lose, I think, 4 games where they scored 35-plus points, and you're just sitting there wondering, man, why can't a thing break our way? Why can't something happen for the Cincinnati Bengals? And if one extra thing broke our way, obviously the Cowboys game broke our way last year. But if we had one extra game break our way, we're in the postseason. And God knows what would have happened if the Bengals make the postseason. This year, we've already gotten one of those games we've asked ourselves, why can't we be lucky? Why can't we get one of those one time? And here, we're in week 1. We get a game that we got outgained by 250 yards, I believe, by the Cleveland Browns and Joe Flacco and a core of rookies that you've never heard of. And you won the game. Yeah, it took a couple missed field goals, a missed PAT. Yeah, it took 2 drop passes for them to convert on a first down. Yeah, it took even 2 more drop passes that turned into interceptions. So you got about as lucky as you could get, but you walk away with a win. And if you want to be optimistic, that's what happens in sports. Things come, things go. You win games, you lose games. The fumble falls your way, the fumble falls their way sometimes, and one weekend they've already got a win.
Well, I think the most important thing in the NFL, if you have a team that you think is a good enough team to make the postseason, I think that the most important thing out of all of it, you can go week by week and sit here and act like maybe it's how well you're playing, how good you look, this, that, and the next. I think by far the most critical thing is if you stay healthy. So if you're capable of staying healthy, you can keep your key players on the field pretty much for the entirety of the season. Obviously, there's always a chance that someone gets banged up here and there. They're questionable and they don't play one week. That's obvious. But you head into the postseason with your core players that you feel good about. They're relatively not too banged up. That is the most important thing by far. In fact, there are times where I would argue that even if you do have a couple core players that kind of go down with injury, and they have 4 or 5 weeks that they take off and they have to get healthy for something, and they are healthy heading into the postseason, that sometimes could even bode more well for you versus having some guys that have been out there for all 17 weeks. So, yeah, I don't know. If I was a betting man, which some say I used to be, I would be willing to
Don't bet anymore?
I kind of retired. I don't know why. I just randomly did. Kind of cold turkey did. It was like I don't have a reason to stop. I think it was a time thing, to be honest with you. I know that sounds goofy, but I just don't have time to do it anymore. Is that crazy to say?
When it first became legal here in Ohio, it did take up a lot of our time. We spent a lot of time talking about bets and everything like that. And now it's just, if you do throw one in, it's more of a spur of the moment thing. Like, I'm gonna watch this game, I'll throw some money. Right.
That's the amount of not that it was a lot of research, but it was just trying to keep up with the old percentages. Kind of took a toll over time. So they're going to go 3-3 or better. So
let's get Stone inducted into this show. We haven't used Stone a whole lot. Our crack producer, he's got an hour of content coming up.
He's got to do an hour of content on his own.
Yeah. So
by the way, doing a great job.
You are doing a great job, Stone. We share things you guys comment, and we share different tweets that we get sometimes. We had a great comment.
I seen that.
We had a great comment.
And they're not wrong.
No.
They're not wrong. I mean, it is what it is. I got 2 guys out here just, doing our best, but hey.
But yeah, it was. They said, "How can I give a major thumbs down to the lead-in show for the Stone Shield show?" And that's what this show is. It's the lead-in for the Stone Shield show.
100% right.
So, Stone, I want to get you introduced here. How important do you think this game is this Sunday for the Bengals, or do you think it's just they're all important? Obviously, when the margins are normally a game leaves you out of the postseason or gets you into the postseason. How important do you think this game is against the Jacksonville Jaguars?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I was told, by the way, that it's Jaguars and not Jaguars, and that people here in Ohio just say Jaguars, and it's actually pronounced Jaguars.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of fighting against. Is there's clearly some mispronunciation, but I'm not Merriam-Webster, so I don't know who to.
That's fair. Yeah.
If I get the call.
Anyway, yeah, I do think it's big. You just need to win these games where you're going to be favored, right? And you look at the schedule. We looked at it earlier. The NFC North, I think you could argue, is probably the best division in football, right? And you got to go on the road for some of those games. Denver's certainly going to be an issue. And you got a lot of road games coming up as well. And I think also on the other side of that coin, you want to understand that, hey, you didn't play well enough at home, especially in the beginning last year. You're trying to turn that narrative here in week 2 of this season. So, yeah, to your point, I think it's a massive game for Cincinnati. We got on the thumbnail there, must win. Maybe that's a little bit extreme. But I think, going into week 3, 2-0 versus 1-1 against 2 teams in Cleveland and Jacksonville that you clearly have the better roster and are clearly favored in both those games as well is really significant for this football team. So you have a perfect record right now at 1-0, but it does feel like a really big game here. Week 2, the open and orange at home. We all remember what happened week 1 last year against New England when you had the orange out and everybody was all excited. And then you went out there and you just kind of laid an egg. You're trying to hope that doesn't happen again this week. And I think it's a massive game against a team with a really good quarterback, and they got some skill players as well in Jacksonville.
I like how you said they got a really good quarterback. Are you still a believer in Trevor Lawrence?
I am. Yeah, I always have been. I remember following him when he was at Cartersville High School in Georgia, being excited that, he's this 5-star guy going to Clemson, gets in the national championship. Obviously, he ended up being the starter that season for Clemson as well. And, I'm still a believer in him. I question sometimes if football is, his life, so to speak, if he puts enough time into the game, as crazy as that sounds. But he's got the arm, certainly. He's got the leadership skills. And I'm still hanging on. Obviously, right now he looks like he's just grossly overpaid. But new guy calling the plays there, Liam Cohen. I'm still holding on to some hope that Trevor Lawrence can be a good quarterback. And but obviously, every time Joe Burrow goes against him, Joe Burrow has his number, dating back to that national title game and then that Thursday night game during Lawrence's rookie season a few years ago as well. So
that ended Urban's career.
Yes,
that ended. Right. If you remember that ended Urban's career. He went
back, what it was?
He went back up to Dublin, Ohio, had himself a night. A night up there a couple years ago. But I was yesterday. Stone did his power rankings on his show, and we were talking after his show, and I was just kind of unveiling my thoughts and kind of teasing, and we're going to do my power rankings here in a second. And I don't think anybody has ever hated power rankings more than Stone did when I was just unveiling who I went. He just kept shaking his head, and all he kept saying to me was, "They're power rankings," and I didn't understand what he meant at the time. He was just like, "What are you doing? These are power rankings." So obviously, I must not have understood the assignment. But I'm going to give both Trace and Stone a chance to tear apart my first power rankings of the season as we head into week 2. All right, guys. So coming in at number 10, Minnesota Vikings. They get a good win on Monday Night Football. They play a game. I think they have one of the better rosters in the entire NFL. I think if you look at top to bottom, offensive line, weapons, defensive line, linebackers, head coach, all that thing, the Minnesota Vikings are about as good as it gets, probably top 5 in the league. It's just you really don't know what you're going to get from that starting quarterback who didn't have to do a whole lot in college, J.J. McCarthy, but man, oh man, did he have one of the better fourth quarters that you've ever seen in a debut by we'll call him a rookie quarterback, even though it's his second year. So I'll tentatively put the Minnesota Vikings there at number 9. They won 14 games last year with Sam Darnold. So I don't think the bar is very high. And Sam Darnold played well, but I don't think the bar is very high for him to have a really productive season. Coming in at number 9 is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I like this, yeah. Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Underrated.
This is your guy, Baker Mayfield, and Trace likes to bring that up. And I've
always liked Baker Mayfield. He's a gamer. He's a guy that I'd like to have on my football team if I had a marginal quarterback. I can live and die with Baker Mayfield.
The reason with Baker Mayfield is easy to root for is, one, you feel like he got a raw deal in Cleveland, which he did. He was the best quarterback that they've had since they've restarted their franchise in the late 90s, and they shipped him out for Deshaun Watson, and we all know how that turned out. He plays with the kind of swagger, plays with the cockiness that it's easy to root for, that it still feels like even though he plays with that swagger, he's always kind of an underdog. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have been a good team, obviously, for many years, even before Tom Brady got there. Just a really good team, so I think I have them at number 9. This is a team that I think at number 8 that is probably a little lower on my rankings than other people have. They went to the NFC Championship game a year ago. It's the Washington Commanders. I think they have, for what I say is the 5th best quarterback in the NFL, and Jaden Daniels, a guy that pretty much from the second he stepped on the field looked like a generational talent. I think they had a very lucky season last year, but still I think they could be even better this year and not accomplish what they did last year. I think that if they make it to the NFC Championship game, that's absolutely amazing. They had a lot of things fall their way en route to the NFC Championship game last year, but I think the Washington Commanders are still one of the top 10 teams in this league and coming in at number 8. Coming in at number 7, this is where I might start losing some of you. Maybe not. I have the Chargers.
All right.
The reason I have the Chargers here.
Why is that?
In the NFL, you have quarterbacks and you have coaches. Those are the two most important things for any team. And I think Justin Herbert is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I think Jim Harbaugh is one of the best coaches that the sport has ever seen. Obviously, he's had success wherever he goes, and it pretty much happens immediately. So if you're asking me, who do I think is going to be consistently good, not just this year, but going forward, you've got to take the Chargers just because they've got two pieces of the puzzle, two of the three pieces, and they'll continue to win. Obviously, they get a big win over Kansas City on week 1. But I still have Kansas City, just to spoil it. I still have them ahead of the Chargers. But I still think they're going to be very, very good. I think the Rashawn Slater injury is going to rear its ugly head at some point this season. Coming in at number 6, who I think is actually probably the best coach in the league.
Wow. The best coach in the league?
I have the Rams. I have the Rams.
I'm listening. You like Matt Stafford?
The thing that I like about the Rams is it feels like they just hang around. There's never a whole lot of excitement about the Rams, but when it comes to them playing one of the best teams in the league, they were moments away from beating the Philadelphia Eagles in the postseason last year.
They were.
It feels like every single time that it comes to play a big game, the Los Angeles Rams come up. Didn't have a whole lot of offense this past week, but they won, and that's just what they've done ever since John McVay has gotten there. We're going to get in the top 5, and just to spoil it, I've got 2 teams that have lost week 1 in the top 5, and the first is the Kansas City Chiefs. Everyone seems to think that the Kansas City Chiefs, it reminds me of the Patriots. Everyone's trying to predict when they're going to fall off. When are they going to fall off? The Kansas City Chiefs won 20 games last year, or 19 games. They went to the Super Bowl, and everyone thinks just because they got their tail whipped in the Super Bowl and they lose week 1 to a really good team in the Chargers that, this is the end of it. You asked yesterday, you asked earlier this week, do you think the Chiefs are going to make the postseason? I can almost guarantee that the Kansas City Chiefs will make the postseason, and I can almost guarantee that they'll be in the AFC Championship game because to this point in Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid's marriage, that's all they've done.
Feels different.
That's all they've done. But it does feel different. There is something that feels different, and we've now been looking at a Patrick Mahomes and a Kansas City Chiefs team that hasn't had a whole lot of explosive offense for a few years now, but we'll see. Until they fall off, until they start 0-4, I'll continue to put them in my top 10, more than likely top 5. Your Green Bay Packers coming in number 4.
Yeah, they are.
Trace, do you think they're a Super Bowl contender?
Well, they're definitely a Super Bowl contender. Will they make the Super Bowl? That's time will tell. Jordan Love still has to progress and become what I would call a consistently good player. He's had moments where he's looked really, really good. He's had moments where you kind of scratch your head and you ask yourself if he's the same type of player, because there were times at the beginning of last season where Malik Willis, you're questioning whether or not Malik Willis actually isn't going to be maybe better for this offense. Well, that's obviously a crazy, crazy thought as the year progressed, but that thought did pop through my head, which is something that probably should never pop through your head if you think you have an elite quarterback. Now, having said that, I think the difference between the Packers in years past and now is the defense. I think they have a legitimate, bona fide defense that they can hang their hat on. They don't have to rely on good offensive play to get to a Super Bowl. And the fact that you add Micah Parsons obviously is a big part of that. But I think even more so that they have a lot of good players. They have a lot of good depth players that no one really will talk about and get headlines. Luke Van Ness is a great player. And we'll see if the Packers can, hopefully at some point find a way to get over the San Francisco 49ers, so I hope don't even make the playoffs, so we don't have to worry about them. But they're still there.
Well, the San Francisco 49ers aren't in Reed Aru's top 10, so they might not make the postseason.
That's good, but I'm saying if the 49ers are in the postseason, then I have a suspicion that there's a chance that they don't beat them.
The thing about the Green Bay Packers there, and just watching Week 1, is 2 teams impressed me more than anybody, and one of them was the Green Bay Packers, and they just look like a complete team.
They look the part.
They look like a complete team. The one thing that you're wondering about is, can Jordan Love be the Jordan Love that was in the second half 2 years ago, or are we going to get just kind of the inconsistent Jordan Love that we've had now for a good part of his career? All right, so you like to use the word delta. You say the delta between things.
Yes,
and I
definitely do.
The delta between these next 3 teams is so marginally thin, but this is how I have the top 3 teams in the NFL coming out, and this is going to surprise you guys. But coming in number 3, the team that won on Sunday Night Football, the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen, I think, is currently playing football better than anybody else on the planet, and I don't think you can really argue that a whole lot. He has been absolutely amazing. The problem with the Buffalo Bills is, even though they have the best football player on the planet, and I do think they are well coached, I do think they have a pretty good roster, is too often they ask Josh Allen to win them the game. They just go, hey, Josh, you're going to have to put on the superhero cape, the Superman cape, and you're going to have to go win us this game. And that works a lot of the time. But as we've seen in the postseason the last few years, it hasn't worked well enough. And he's played fantastic. It's been the defense that has failed him in the postseason the past few years. But Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills just aren't as complete teams as the top two teams that I have in the league. Coming in at number 2, Philadelphia Eagles. And the reason I have the Philadelphia Eagles coming in at number 2 is because their quarterback. I think they have the best roster in the league, top to bottom. But for some reason, I cannot trust Jalen Hurts. He's given me no reason not to trust Jalen Hurts. But, man, when your team starts using him less and less and you become better, as they did last year, they were too Jalen Hurts reliant at the beginning of last year, and they go, all right, we're going to start handing the ball off. We're going to let the rest of this roster play. And then they win the Super Bowl and look like one of the more dominant teams that I've ever seen.
He played great in the Super Bowl, though.
And he's played well in the postseason. Yeah. But I just like the team at number 1's quarterback a lot more, and that's Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. Listen.
Here we go.
I know they lost on Sunday Night Football, and they blew a lead late. But you guys would be lying to yourself if for the first 3.5 quarters you didn't think to yourself, this is the best team in the NFL. They looked like they were men, and the Buffalo Bills defense were little boys. They looked dominant in that game. Once again, I fully understand they did not win that game. And I fully understand putting a team 0-1 as the number 1 team in the NFL is blasphemous, is crazy. But, man, they looked so much more impressive than any team that I saw this week up until the last 4 minutes of that game. They dominated the Buffalo Bills, I thought, for 3.5 quarters. Once again, understood that they did not win, but that's who I have at number 1.
I'll tell you what was more impressive was you running the graphics package while also trying to go through each of your thoughts, and also, pretty much doing a very good job of articulating while also doing that. So next time I'll tell you, I'll happily do that for you. But in regards to the list, I don't have a huge problem with it. I do think the Vikings is maybe the only one that I'm just not on board with. I get the idea that they had Sam Darnold last year.
Won 14 games last year with Sam Darnold.
14 games, and but it's hard to deny. It's hard to deny. I guess my thing is like, who thought that list was absurd?
Stone, what did you hated having the Ravens at number 1?
Yeah. Look, as I kept saying yesterday, it's power ranking. So to me, you have to take into account what transpired in week 1, and they lost in week 1. They have an 0-1 record. Yeah, I think the Ravens are going to win the division, unfortunately. I think they're going to be a really good football team. But to sit there at 0-1 after they blew another lead, if you're
this
John
is the
Harbaugh,
power ranking, Stone, not the standings. This isn't the standings.
Yeah, so he's a little bit on your side too there. But I think record has to take a little bit into effect here if you're talking about this. But like the Chiefs, I have them in the top 10, obviously. They're 0-1. The Ravens obviously belong near the top, but I don't understand how they can leapfrog the defending Super Bowl champions who just beat Dallas. And obviously that game got a little bit closer later, but I think that was kind of dominated, especially early on, by Philadelphia.
Well, here's the thing, is if it's week 8, if it's week 9, we're later on in the year, and we've had this team because no one goes undefeated other than the Miami Dolphins and the 2007 New England Patriots. A team's going to lose at some point. And one team, the Philadelphia Eagles, at some point are going to lose a game this year. And you can have them at 1 every single week, the first 8 weeks. And then when they lose a game, do you just drop them behind the team they lost to? No. You guys are being blinded a little bit too much by the week 1 results. I'm looking at this as what team was I most impressed by?
Right.
And it was the Baltimore Ravens, bar none. I think both the Bills and the Ravens are going to have questions in their secondary. I think we saw what the Ravens did in the second half of last season where they shored up their defense in the second half, and it looked like a much better defense in the last 8-10 weeks. I think same thing's going to happen. The Bills, I'm not so sure about. I still think those are the 3 best teams by a decent margin, and you can even put the Packers in there in 2 or 3 weeks. I have no problem lumping them up there as well. But I think, like I said, the delta between those teams isn't large, but right now I'm most impressed by the Baltimore Ravens.
Thought it was a very, very, very solid power rankings. I didn't see anything in there that I thought was absolutely absurd. I knew that we used to have Casey's tier rankings there that we used to go through that sometimes made not a ton of sense, but I do
stink
understand.
list.
Yeah, the stink list had some stinkers on it, but I don't.
So
At this point in the year, the good news is that it just doesn't totally matter where you're at on that rankings. The Bengals aren't even inside your top 10. I'd like to think that they could rally and find themselves in the top 10. They're 11.
They're 11.
If you push come to shove, you told me, hey, who would you rather take, the Bengals roster or the Vikings roster? I would take the Bengals just because I think that there's some pieces there that have a ceiling that's high enough to actually do something. Which I guess that's another great question is like, what do you want out of your team? Do you want a team that is like the Pittsburgh Steelers who, let's face it, they can't win the Super Bowl. They have no chance of winning the Super Bowl. Everyone in Pittsburgh is going to get real excited this year about how they got Aaron Rodgers and they might have finally a quarterback again that might get him somewhere. Right. He's not getting you to a Super Bowl. With all due respect, I love Aaron Rodgers. I love him. In fact, every time someone said something bad about Aaron Rodgers, I try to defend him to a certain extent because he's brought so much happiness to my life. No one loves Aaron Rodgers more than me. That's like almost like that's a very funny bit there that we could do. But nonetheless, Aaron Rodgers is not good enough, mobile enough to win in the North, and he's nowhere near damn good enough to win you a Super Bowl. And you can convince yourself that it is, but we all know that it's not. So if you want to be like the Pittsburgh Steelers, to be just good enough to hang around, to maybe be like just in the playoffs, that's cool. You know who they kind of remind me of? Not to sit here and make this a full, well-rounded show. Pittsburgh Steelers, kind of like the Cincinnati Reds. Get you excited.
Oh, man.
Maybe they'll make a run, but you know what? At the end of the day, there's a ceiling there that's just not high enough to win the ultimate prize. And maybe the ultimate prize isn't quite the thing that in Cincinnati from a Reds perspective of what we want. That's fine. I can get on board with that. But the NFL in Pittsburgh, that's not what they're hoping for. If you think you went to a Pittsburgh Steelers fan right now and you pulled them and you said, hey, you guys get to the postseason, you get blown out the first postseason game. You going to take that? The answer is unequivocally no. If you told a Reds fan right now they make the postseason, and the series might not go one way or the other, they'd probably take it in a heartbeat. So I think that the expectations are two different things, to be very clear. I guess my point with that whole thing is that the Bengals have a chance to do something special because their ceiling's high.
Correct.
The Vikings have no chance. Zero. They have no chance, Reed. Their quarterback is not good enough to even come close to competing against teams that are worthwhile.
That fourth quarter, though.
Yeah, that 2-run home run last night, though.
That pick six was really bad. One of the worst I've ever seen from old JJ. But, man, that fourth quarter, he looked really good. This is the argument that I've always made about, we always talk about who was it the owner that said when the season starts, was that Castellini that said when the season starts, half the teams are out of it in the MLB. They said when the season starts, half the teams got no shot. And they know they've got no shot.
Yep.
To be honest, the NFL is fantastic. You're fooling yourself.
Yeah.
If you think even those 10 teams that I just showed have a shot. Like, you're seriously fooling yourself because we all know, like, there's 3, 4, 5 teams that make the postseason every year that you're just looking at and you're like, yeah, no chance. The Denver Broncos last year, the Pittsburgh Steelers last year.
Right.
Those are teams, it happens every year in the NFL that when you get to the postseason, there's really 4 teams that could probably win the Super Bowl. Maybe 5 on a good year, maybe 6, but more often than not, it's 4 teams that you're actually looking at true contenders. And the last time that it even came close to bucking that was when the Bengals went to the Super Bowl. Because I can tell you right now, going into that postseason, no one thought the Bengals had a chance to win it, and they didn't. To the credit of everyone that thought that the Bengals had no chance to win it, they didn't win the Super Bowl. They were right there. But the NFL, more often than not, if you don't have an elite quarterback or in an elite roster with a good head coach, you're not going to win this. You're not going to win the Super Bowl. It's just the way it is. You've got to have a really good quarterback. You've got to have a really good head coach to win the Super Bowl. But I digress.
At least I will give you the credit of saying that we don't totally know what J.J. McCarthy is for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there's speculation on what he is, and certainly I don't believe in him. I've never believed in him, and I'll see if I'm wrong on this one. I have the same sentiments that I have with Justin Fields as I do with J.J. McCarthy, to be quite honest.
Kevin O'Connell has won a lot of games with Kirk Cousins and won a lot of games with Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, they hadn't won a whole lot anywhere else. So I like JJ's opportunity. You know, you've made this point many a times when talking about the NFL. Where you land is as important as your talents. Yeah. Patrick Mahomes is going to go down as one of, if not the greatest quarterbacks that ever played, just because of what we see in the early parts of his career. If he doesn't go to Kansas City, he doesn't have anywhere near what we're seeing right now from him. That's just a point-blank matter of fact. This is why everyone is so high on Joe Burrow, because to Joe Burrow's credit, he's gone to a place that, not a whole lot of success had happened prior. Yeah, they've been kind of hovering around postseason. Yeah, the Cincinnati Bengals were always a little competent, but they had never been true contenders. Where you go matters. J.J. McCarthy's got one of the best play callers in the league. He's got a pretty good offensive line, and he's got really good weapons to call on. Justin Jefferson, T.J. Hawkinson in the lot. So we'll see what happens with J.J., but we talked about this earlier this week. It's pretty clear there's a direct correlation between quarterbacks that succeed in this league and how easy of a college road they had. And J.J. McCarthy didn't have to do a whole lot in college. Yeah. He pretty much had the best roster in college football, and he pretty much just handed the ball off, and 4 or 5 times a game he had to make a throw. He's going to have to do that a whole lot more in the NFL.
Yeah, we'll find. The good news is that they play the games, and we get to find out together of what J.J. McCarthy will ultimately be. But I'm giving you, I guess, the benefit of the doubt that I'm not going to go out and say anything crazy like I did with the Pittsburgh Steelers of saying they have no chance of doing anything special, because maybe I'm just completely wrong about J.J. McCarthy. But I know, when I've watched Aaron Rodgers over the last few years, and he's just not mobile enough to stay healthy. He's not going to stay healthy. And I hate that. I'm not trying to wish injury upon anybody, but this guy is going to be a sitting duck back there when you have the likes of Myles Garrett and Trey Hendrickson, and also anyone else. I'm sure I'm trying to forget in this division that can go and sack the quarterback. I'm sure the Ravens have some guys right now that can get to the quarterback. And I just have a hard time believing he's going to make it. Maybe we'll see if he does, but good luck to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't believe in them at all.
We'll shelve the NFL Stock Exchange, which is a new way of calling a buy or sell. I was going to ask.
We've done that before.
Yeah, we've done that. We've spiced up the buy or sells time and time again here on Off the Bench, but it was essentially going to be a buy or sell, and we're going to shelve it because I think there's some questions that we can get to next week, asking pretty similar things, and one of them was going to be your opinion on the Pittsburgh Steelers. But
we already found that out.
So we were talking about, Jim Harbaugh and Kevin O'Connell. I see Sean Connor talking about J.J. McCarthy. And if Jim Harbaugh and Kevin O'Connor believe in J.J., who are we here, us dummies, to believe in it? Which is fair. That's a fair. They've known more about football than we'll ever forget about it. But I was sitting around. I was going on a run this morning, and I was sitting thinking about the NFL. And we often talk about the top 4 quarterbacks in the league, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow. And I was thinking, if there was a fantasy draft, all teams started brand new, and everyone that is on the payroll for the NFL can be drafted. I'm talking head coaches, I'm talking coordinators, I'm talking Howie Roseman and Mike Veach and all these guys that are GMs that are in charge of roster construction around the league. And I started thinking, if you could draft any of them, pick one, you're going to quarterback, right? You're gonna. I think the question I was wondering is how many picks down the line do you think it would go before someone other than a quarterback was taken? And who do you think that would be? If you started, everyone gets to pick, all right, first up is your Green Bay Packers. They can pick anyone in the league. They take Josh Allen. And then the second one, they want Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow. How many picks down the line do you think it would take before a non-quarterback is taken? And who do you think that would be?
I know it sounds crazy, but I would almost include, and this is where it is kind of wild, because the NFL is obviously a cap league. You should have equal opportunity, and that's the way that the league is based upon, is to try to create as much equality as humanly possible. But I would say, if you got to draft, just so you're a fan and you get to pick your own team based off of all the resources or all the different things, I know it sounds wild, but I think ownership would be one of the top picks for me. I'd go find an owner that is obviously
cash rich,
that is very committed to trying to do everything they can to win, And I would 100% take that as my first pick because I think it starts at the top, and it's pretty clear and evident that there's a lot of franchises that don't go anywhere. They've had smart people in the building, and Bill Belichick was in Cleveland, and all of these different things can happen in Cleveland. You can't convince me that all of these players and all of these coaches didn't know how to get Cleveland over the proverbial hump. No, the problem is that you have somebody at the very, very top that continues to put people in charge and then either takes their ability to do the right thing away or doesn't stick with them long enough, and they have very, very bad acumen when it comes to running an NFL franchise. So that's where I would start. I would probably take, and again, I don't know all the owners.
Man, you'd take an owner over
yeah.
If you could take Josh Allen.
It's so short-lived, Reed. It's so short-lived. Yeah, Josh Allen's going to have another great run for the next, 5 or 6 years?
Yeah, but if you win a Super Bowl, it makes the pick worth it.
You can win multiple Super Bowls with a great owner. I mean, and also, no offense to Josh Allen, but there's probably 3 or 4 other quarterbacks that I would argue you could sit there and debate over. How many ownership groups would you say you feel really, really good about in the grand scheme of things of winning or playing winning football? I don't know. Maybe I'm overly sensitive to ownership groups, and maybe they don't matter as much, but it seems like they do, and that's kind of where I would start.
Yeah, I was wondering, like a guy like Howie Roseman, who he's not just sitting on his hands as the GM, and I don't even know if that's his official role, but he's the exec that puts together the Philadelphia Eagles. He's not just sitting on his hands and be like, all right, I had the best roster. They made 6 trades in the last month and a half. So, like, he's continually being aggressive and going out there. How early would a Howie Roseman, man, you would take an owner first overall? Stone, if you were in this pick, how late do you think it would take before a quarterback is not taken?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think, as you mentioned, there's the 4 quarterbacks that they're going to go. They're going to be the first 4 picks, right? The order, we can debate that all day long. And then there's a couple of the younger guys. I know you mentioned Jaden Daniels. He's going to go early as well. But then I think edge rusher is probably the thing where I'm thinking. Myles Garrett, he's in his 30s, so maybe not him. We, of course, saw how dominant he was this past week against the Cincinnati Bengals. I think edge rusher is probably where I'm leaning. Micah Parsons, right? He's got some health concerns perhaps, but he's a younger guy. He has that upside, can completely wreck a game. I'm going to push back a little bit against Trace. I totally get what he's saying with the owner, but I would definitely lean head coach before the owner.
Yeah,
and
I would take a Sean McVay.
I think Sean McVay, he's a top 15 pick, right? You get some quarterbacks off the board. You get some edge rushers who are going to have the ability to wreck a game. And then you have Sean McVay, who's a young guy, has won a ton of football games, and has won even, with suspect quarterback play in the past, right? Like before, Matthew Stafford was there. He had Jared Goff, who, of course, has kind of turned over a new leaf in Detroit. But even that gap year in between, remember Baker Mayfield off the street, they win that football game.
Yeah.
So Sean McVay, to me, is probably a guy that's kind of a lock to go top 15.
Yeah, it was just on a run today, and I was just thinking, like, how early would you take somebody? And to put the cards on the table, I would go a quarterback the first 7 picks probably. I'd take the 4 that everyone talks about. I'd take a Jaden Daniels. I'd take a Justin Herbert. Might even take someone like a C.J. Stroud or along those lines. And then you start looking at, all right, do I want Howie Roseman? Do I want Sean McVay? I think an edge rusher would probably go a little later. We know Zach Taylor would be in the top 15 picks as well, as would Mike Brown certainly be in the top 25 picks or so. Would Mike Brown be your first overall pick? No,
I don't think so. I don't think Mike Brown would probably be on the list at all. I think he'd be one of those do not touch prospects on the board. No matter where they fall, you don't take them.
All right, so that wraps it up here on Off the Bench. The Stone Shield Show is going to be coming up. Just some housekeeping things. Next Sunday, not this Sunday, but a week from this Sunday, we will have a watch-along down at Smoke Justice for the Vikings game. That is the Bengals' second road game. We're going to have a watch-along. A bunch of Chatterbox people will be down there, come together as we cheer on the Bengals. There will be more news about that to come out. Just wanted to get it on your guys' radar. September 21st down there and right over the Kentucky border at Smoke Justice. We'll be looking to have you out there. But, Trace, thank you. It was a good week. It's our last show.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. I appreciate jumping back on Off the Bench here. It was probably the world's worst week for me personally to get back on the horse here of Off the Bench with the Reds being on the road, and obviously we have like 2 or 3 or 4 things that we got going on around here that we need to do today. Just to be clear, I think we got to be very, very careful, Reed, when you make announcements, because you said we won't be back on Off the Bench this week. Then people think it's getting canceled. To be very clear, Off the Bench, to be very, very clear, is not going anywhere. We just have a very, very important event on Thursday and Friday that's been scheduled for months on top of months on top of months that unfortunately we can't miss. But Stone Shields will be here, and let's face it, Stone Show so far, light years ahead of our show. And listen, that's fair. That's the truth. It gives us something to shoot for and strive for, and we will do just that. But thank you. We appreciate you. We'll be back. Myself and Reed will be back next week, hopefully better than ever. But you always will have Stone Shields, and he is coming up next. Take care, everybody. It was a pleasure, and have a good weekend, since we're not going to talk to you until then.
Who dat?
All right, here we go. Welcome into the Stone Shield Show on this fine Wednesday, September the 10th, our third edition of the Stone Shield Show. Appreciate everybody sticking around from Off the Bench and joining us here on today's show. As always, we will be on from 11 to noon every single day, Monday through Friday, throughout the football season, and then we're going to continue to hopefully do it throughout basketball, baseball. The goal here is to make it a year-round show, and in order for us to do it, obviously, I got to do a good job. We got to continue to get better each and every day, but the support of you guys means a lot as well. I certainly appreciate you guys hanging around and hanging out with me as we talk some Cincinnati Bengals football and also dive into some other topics on today's show. And for the first time this week, we're going to be spending some time talking about the Cincinnati Reds. The boys, of course, touched on it a little bit earlier this morning. Exciting win last night on the West Coast. If you stayed up and watched it, Tyler Stevenson, the hero in that game, as the Reds win 4-2, and they're 3 games behind the New York Mets. Do they have a chance at perhaps closing the distance and making this thing a little bit interesting as we go down the stretch here and get into the final games of the season once the end of September rolls around? We will see. Are they just playing with our emotions a little bit? Probably, if we're just being completely honest here. But we're going to spend some time talking about the Cincinnati Reds on today's show. Also, today, of course, is Wednesday, but we didn't get to talk about the Monday night game much on yesterday's show, of course, between the Minnesota Vikings and the Chicago Bears. I've got some takeaways from that game that I want to touch on. If you're a Bears fan, you might need to start, I'm not going to say hit the panic button, but you need to be a little bit nervous, and obviously you have some reservations towards what exactly is transpiring on the football field with Caleb Williams. I get it. Year 2, game 1. but some shaky things, certainly if you're a Bears fan, kind of has you a little bit on the edge of your seat. Also, the 49ers were able to come back and beat Seattle this past weekend. Pretty entertaining game, despite the fact that obviously it was a very low-scoring game. We've got some takeaways from that game as well. Brock Purdy is banged up, and perhaps he might not be able to go this coming week for the San Francisco 49ers. And Mac Jones could be a guy that has to make a start. Jones obviously was a former first-round pick of the New England Patriots, and then he spent last year with Jacksonville as Trevor Lawrence's backup, and then he could very well be thrust into duty when the Niners play the Saints this coming Sunday at 1 o'clock. And then we'll have some closing thoughts to kind of wrap things out on today's show, and we'll spend more time talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. Obviously, tomorrow we'll probably do our preview as we kind of figure things out here. That'll probably be on Thursdays. We'll do some keys to victory and, of course, talk about the Thursday night game. That is obviously tomorrow night, which is a great game, and I'm looking forward to talking about that tomorrow. But let's start with the Cincinnati Bengals, as we typically do here at this show. The Bengals made a flurry of roster moves yesterday, and, of course, we talked about the signing of Isaiah Foskey. That kind of happened right before we came on the air yesterday. Signed to the practice squad, former second-round pick by the New Orleans Saints, right? He was the 40th overall selection a couple of years ago in that draft where the Bengals selected Myles Murphy in the first round. Could he be a guy that perhaps has a role on the active roster as time progresses? I think that signing is a guy where you might see him get some elevations from the practice squad to the active roster. But Mike Pennell, who they brought in recently from the Kansas City Chiefs, he's being signed to the active roster. He was an elevation week 1 against the Cleveland Browns, and he was signed to the practice squad on September 1st, so he has not been around very long. He's a veteran guy, has played a ton in the National Football League, and I think the Bengals really like what they've seen from him in the past, week or so, week plus, right? And I think they look at him as a guy that can really help shore up that interior of their defensive line for the Cincinnati Bengals, an area, of course, they have really, really struggled with the past couple of years. Officially, Lucas Patrick has been placed on the injured reserve. Patrick, he's a ninth-year guy, right, was kind of brought in to kind of be that Band-Aid solution at that right guard spot for the Cincinnati Bengals. He goes down, as we talked about yesterday, basically immediately in the second quarter of week 1. Dalton Risner will get called upon. Zach Taylor said in his press conference yesterday that he is going to miss a couple of weeks, and at some point I think he'll be ready to come back and join the team, and I look for him to kind of be that backup along the interior of the offensive line, right? I don't think he's necessarily going to be able to take his starting job back from Dalton Risner, unless, of course, Risner plays really poorly these next few weeks. But I think Patrick is going to be a guy that's just going to serve as that backup, right? He's got versatility. Shoot, he can play center if he has to, left guard, right guard, and I think that will be more of his role going forward. The Bengals also signed an edge rusher, Miles Cole, to the practice squad. We did not mention him yesterday. He is a second-year player out of Texas Tech, and last year he was originally a 7th-round draft choice by the Jacksonville Jaguars, ironically, who the Bengals, of course, play this week. He played in 8 games as a rookie for the Jaguars last season, recorded 8 tackles, had 1 tackle for a loss, and he was waived by Jacksonville back on August 26th. We will see if he perhaps is a guy that gets elevated to the active roster this week, but kind of another interesting signing from the Cincinnati Bengals, kind of coupling that with Isaiah Foskey, 2 edge rushers coming in for the Cincinnati Bengals, position that we've talked at length about, and a position in which they've struggled with, right, outside of Trey Hendrickson really having an ability to get pass rush on opposing quarterbacks. And I think those 2 guys to the practice squad, I think it's a little bit noteworthy because, of course, the first guy that we talked about, Foskey, was a former second-round pick. Some people around the league still believe he has a lot of potential. And then Miles Cole, of course, was a former draft pick as well. Not like he was an undrafted guy, 7th-round pick by Jacksonville last season. Isaiah Thomas, he was an edge that has been hanging around the Bengals practice squad for a couple of years now. He was released from the practice squad in the flurry of all those moves for Cincinnati yesterday. So lots of moves here after week 1 for the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll see if any of those guys get elevated and are out there on the football field this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars. But let's talk a little bit about that game. As Reed and Trace mentioned on Off the Bench, yeah, you have a 1-0 record. Yeah, it's early in the year, but this Jacksonville game feels like it's really been magnified when you take a look at the rest of the Cincinnati Bengals Bengals schedule as they progress not only through the month of September, but also into October as well. You're playing the NFC North this year, right? That certainly is a very challenging division in the National Football League. I would argue probably the deepest division in the National Football League as well. I think Green Bay is very much a Super Bowl threat. Detroit, people have kind of written them off after 1 week. I'm not ready to fully do that. Of course, I didn't have them inside my top 10 power rankings yesterday, but I still think Detroit is a borderline playoff team. I still think at the end of the year they'll be in a position to perhaps make a push, but the loss of both those coordinators definitely very significant. But the Bengals have to play Detroit, and their defense, despite not having to go against Ben Johnson in that particular game, is going to be a bit of an issue for Cincinnati as they go against that high-profile offense. Minnesota, Trace was banging on J.J. McCarthy earlier. I totally agree with him. I said that prior to the Monday night game on our Monday morning show. I don't view J.J. McCarthy as a guy that I think can be a really solid starter in the National Football League, but it's all about placement, right? If J.J. McCarthy was drafted by Jacksonville, I mean, he would be just absolutely cooked, but that's not the reality of the situation. He's drafted in a spot with Kevin O'Connell, where lots of people consider Kevin O'Connell to be a top 5 coach in the National Football League. I would agree with that sentiment as well. He's got, we'll spend more time talking about Minnesota as we kind of reflect a little bit more on that Monday night game. But the defensive coordinator, Brian Flores, I would argue he's maybe the best defensive coordinator in the National Football League. I think he's certainly at the top of that list as well. So Minnesota, despite the question marks at quarterback, are still definitely very much a viable team and can be very difficult for Cincinnati as we go forward. So kind of back to Jacksonville, right? It's at home, a place in which you struggled last season, right? And we always talk about with the Cincinnati Bengals, like, especially when they were making the playoffs and winning playoff games and getting to the AFC Championship. In that second one where they lost to the Kansas City Chiefs, it was like, dang, just imagine if that game was in the jungle here in Cincinnati. It would have been a totally different type of environment, a totally different advantage for the Cincinnati Bengals. That's something Joe Burrow has talked about in the past, and we've kind of lost that conversation in the shuffle of missing the playoffs the past 2 seasons. But playing playoff games at home is a really, really big deal. And despite all of Cincinnati's postseason success, they've had to go on the road a lot throughout the postseason. And I think you could see them perhaps have even more success in the postseason if they had those games at home. But then again, last year at home in the regular season, they weren't really winning a ton of games. They certainly blew a couple at home that they shouldn't have. Remember, it was late in the year before they even won their first home game last year. So they're hoping to turn that around, kind of shift that narrative. It's an open and orange thing again. I really like that. I think the orange uniforms are sick. The Bengals tried that last year, and I think a lot of people kind of have an uneasy feeling with the orange uniforms just because of what transpired in week 1. Last year, you're kind of hoping to right that ship this year if you're the Cincinnati Bengals with the open and orange on Sunday against the Jacksonville Jaguars. But the Jaguars present some challenges to you. I think, in recent years, they're kind of considered, in a lot of ways, the laughing stock of the National Football League, right? They've kind of always been at the bottom, and even years in the past where it felt like they were kind of turning a corner. They, of course, won a playoff game a couple of years ago against Justin Herbert. Then, last year they just didn't do anything, right? And Trevor Lawrence seemingly took a step in the wrong direction. And I still think Jacksonville has an ability to perhaps be competitive. They're in a weak division in the AFC South. Houston certainly has some question marks. I think at the end of the day, Houston's going to win that division. You got Tennessee, who had, of course, the number 1 pick in the draft this past year. Rookie quarterback there. And Indianapolis, Daniel Jones looked great in week 1 against Miami. I don't think that's going to continue. I don't think Indianapolis is really a threat whatsoever as well. So I think the door is open for Jacksonville to kind of have a bounce back year. They beat Carolina, who you could argue is the worst team in the National Football League, so that doesn't really mean much. But they have a quarterback in Trevor Lawrence that's getting paid a lot of money. He got the payday. A lot of people kind of questioned whether or not he deserved it. Well, he got it, and he certainly hasn't lived up to it yet to this point. But he's got all the traits. He's got a rocket for an arm. He's good at reading defenses, diagnosing things at the line of scrimmage. He's a very good athlete as well. He's fast. He can escape. He can run. Joe Burrow, of course, doesn't really get credit for the athlete that he is, but I think Trevor Lawrence kind of takes it a step further. Trevor Lawrence is a much bigger guy, taller guy as well, and I think stopping his legs is going to be certainly something that needs to be in the game plan for Cincinnati because he has the ability to escape the pocket, and if you don't account for him, he can make you pay with his leg. So I'm expecting Trevor Lawrence to kind of get back on the right track, right? He has an offensive coach who's a rookie head coach in Liam Cohen. He, of course, called plays for Baker Mayfield previously in Tampa Bay, and that's kind of where Baker really showed that he is a really, really good quarterback in this league, and it was with working with Liam Cohen, and I think Trevor Lawrence has the opportunity to do that this year as well. So the Bengals have their work cut out for them. There's also some skill guys that you have to monitor if you're the Cincinnati Bengals. Brian Thomas Jr., he's one of those LSU guys, right? And what just seems to be, besides Ohio State, just kind of a factory for wide receivers since Alabama kind of has fallen off a little bit in that regard. Brian Thomas Jr. is really, really good. He'd get more credit, and he'd be talked about more if he didn't play in Jacksonville. So the Bengals need to have a plan for him. And then Travis Hunter, right? You saw his snaps focused more so on the offensive side of the football in week 1 for Jacksonville. He, of course, has the ability to play on both sides, offense and defense. I think he was only out there for around 10 snaps defensively for Jacksonville. So it seems like, offensively is what you're really going to have to worry about for Travis Hunter, at least now in week 2. If you're the Cincinnati Bengals, and that's someone that they're going to have a close eye on in that football game. And then Trayvon Walker, right? Providing pass rush for Jacksonville. The Bengals didn't do a great job handling that, especially in the second half this past week against Cleveland. Is the front as good for Jacksonville as it is for Cleveland? No, but it's the NFL. Every single team's going to have an ability to rush the passer, and the Bengals better have awareness when it comes to that, and they better do a good job of that. Defensively, I think we're hoping that Cincinnati takes another step in the right direction. I'm really over the moon with what I saw defensively from Al Golden's unit, as we've talked about on the show. Throughout the week, we had lots of question marks in regards to, Al Golden's defense in the preseason. It did nothing. They didn't cover anybody. They got ran through. And now you're in a spot where you got to play, a better team, a better offense than you did in week 1. And I'm really looking to see them take that next step. Well, what does that next step look like if you're the Cincinnati Bengals? We talked about them in the past being so turnover reliant. Again, they created 2 in week 1. They don't create those 2 turnovers, they do not win the football game. So I think, playing good defense without necessarily getting turnovers is something that you have to do, right? Because at some point, you're not going to win the turnover battle every game, and you're not going to be able to force a turnover defensively every single game either, especially if you're playing against a really, really, really good quarterback, and there's several on the schedule this year for Cincinnati. So getting stops without necessarily getting turnovers is something that I am looking for this defense to do. And one thing that I was really excited about with this Bengals front was B.J. Hill. And I think it really is based on how Cincinnati utilized him in this game, which allowed him to be so effective. DJ Reader, as we take a look real quick here at these snap counts, DJ Reader didn't play as much as we have seen him play in the past. He was only out there for 59% of the defensive snaps. And I think that's what allowed him to be so good in the football game and so impactful. I think in years past, you saw Lou Anarumo kind of keep him out there for more snaps, whether it be, 75, 80% of the snaps, and he wasn't always fresh, particularly late in the game. But that looked like it looked like a healthy B.J. Hill, and he was complemented well with Chris Jenkins Jr., of course, your second-round pick out of Michigan last season. He played about 40% of the snaps for Cincinnati defensively. If that's kind of a rotation that you can continue to develop and continue to utilize, I think that's going to be a really, really good thing for Cincinnati if you can keep B.J. Hill fresh, especially late in the game and especially late in the season. He looked really good. I think last year in 2024, I had lots of question marks with B.J. Hill. I think lots of times he was a liability for you defensively. He certainly was not a liability against Cleveland in week 1. I had some question marks as far as bringing him back and signing him in free agency. The Bengals, of course, kind of rolled the dice, signed him to a 3-year deal. He's now back here with the team. It was my way of thinking at the time during free agency, like, BJ, we appreciate you. Everything you've done as a Cincinnati Bengal, it's been great, but we're going to kind of turn it over to somebody else. And I was kind of surprised when Cincinnati opted to hang on to him. But it appears through one game that it was a very good decision for Cincinnati. Really liked the way that he played. And if you want to back it up a little bit to the linebacker unit, You got to be really impressed with what you saw from your linebackers in that first game against the Cleveland Browns, right? Logan Wilson, he looked really good. We spent some time talking about him, right? He was moving around really fast. He looked really good in the game. I think a lot of us were last year watching him like, he looks kind of slow out there. It looks like he's dropped a little bit of weight. He was moving around really nicely. Of course, he was playing through injury last year as well. And also, when the front, I think this is something that doesn't get discussed enough when you're talking about linebacker play. I think the defensive front that you have significantly impacts how you play as a linebacker. For instance, when DJ Reader was here holding down that nose tackle position and Logan Wilson was early in his career, he was unbelievable, right? Because he was able to kind of play with DJ Reader, and it allowed him to be at his best throughout the course of a football game. And then the Bengals last year, who the interior of their defensive line, their defensive line as a whole, besides Troy Hendrickson, was bad, really, the past 2 years. And Logan Wilson, in turn, was pretty bad as well. So I think the front being stabilized a little bit more in week one, I think allowed the linebackers to fly around, be a little bit more free, and make some more plays. And Demetrius Knight, people had some question marks. I think people were excited when they picked him, right? People were excited about the buzz that he was getting around training camp, and then you got to the preseason. Didn't have necessarily his best reps throughout those games. Well, he was an absolute monster, particularly early in that game against Cleveland. I believe he had like 6 tackles that first drive or something outrageous. He was really, really good. And again, I think it allows those linebackers to play a little bit better when they have that front playing a lot better, and that's what Cincinnati certainly had in week one. And, certainly looking forward to the game on Sunday, a big game for Cincinnati. We talked about the schedule a little bit earlier, having to play the NFC North. The division certainly is very, very tough, right? I talked about Aaron Rodgers. In my opinion, as Trey said earlier, I don't think they're Super Bowl contenders, but they're definitely playoff contenders, and they're definitely wild card contenders, and they're definitely going to be a team that you're going to be battling with to get into the postseason. And you've had struggles with them in the past. You've had struggles within the division in general, of course, in the past. The physicality in which they play with, their ability to get to Joe Burrow, get him off his mark a little bit, and just be a really, really physical football team. And seemingly, defensively, you've struggled a lot against Pittsburgh offenses in the past, even with Russell Wilson, right, as the quarterback. So, I think with Aaron Rodgers, they just take another step in the right direction offensively, and that's going to be a tremendous challenge. So the schedule gets really difficult for Cincinnati, and this game against Jacksonville certainly is going to be a big one on Sunday. Not going to call it must-win. You have a 1-0 record, but if you can win that game, then you can really, I don't want to say take a deep breath, but then you really can go attack the season, because then officially the slow start narrative, you've really put that to rest. You're 2-0, right? And then you have to get ready to go down a gauntlet and face really, really quality football teams over the course of the next few weeks. And it doesn't really let up at all as you progress through your schedule. These first 2 weeks are supposed to be the quote-unquote easy games. You survive and advance against Cleveland. Now you have another opportunity against a Jacksonville team that has a lot of good pieces, but you certainly are favored in that game and have the better team on paper. Got to go out there and execute it if you are the Cincinnati Bengals. All right. Appreciate everybody hanging out still. Got about 80 people here in the chat as we are approaching the halfway point on today's show. Appreciate everyone tuning in. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. YouTube.com/ChatterboxSports. Your one-stop shop for the best Cincinnati sports coverage here at Chatterbox Sports, but also we are kind of, tapping into some more national sports coverage on my show. Not something that's really been done a ton here at Chatterbox. We're kind of rolling the dice a little bit with that. It's something that I personally have wanted to do, so that's going to take some time to kind of, get some eyeballs that aren't necessarily Cincinnati sports fans, but I do think there's a lot of value in talking about the NFL this time of year, and certainly college football as well. I think people that are Cincinnati Bengals fans and Cincinnati Reds fans still care about what is transpiring throughout the rest of the NFL and the rest of college football in that regard as well. And then, we'll see where we're at the end of the football season, but I plan on doing a lot of basketball content on the show as well. Again, something that Chatterbox really hasn't done much of, but we're going to see what happens. Xavier hoops, UC Bearcats hoops. You got a new coach, obviously, for Xavier, so we'll spend some time talking about college basketball as well. And as I've talked about throughout the week, still in the beginning stages here. We've got some more graphics that we'll be able to utilize throughout the course of this show as we progress. Hopefully one day, we got a producer, and then we can really have a ton of graphics, have more guests, what have you. But there will still be guests on this show as well. Elliot Rearing, he had his last day at Chatterbox yesterday, but he will be a regular guest on my show. So I know a lot of people were sad about the departure of Elliot, but we will still be seeing him on my show as we progress throughout the next couple of weeks and months here at the Stone Shield Show. So again, hit that sub button, hit that thumbs up icon. We certainly appreciate you for doing that. Okay, Monday Night Football, 2 nights ago. The Chicago Bears hosted the Minnesota Vikings in Chicago. I came on the show and I said I expect Chicago to win this football game. They don't have the better roster. That's not why I thought they were going to win this game. I thought J.J. McCarthy, his first real football game in 600-plus days after the injury last year, of course, won the national championship at Michigan, his final season there. I thought he was going to struggle. That was true for the first 3 quarters, which we'll touch on. But I thought Caleb Williams with Ben Johnson would settle down and we would really see him take that next step as far as trying to, fill those shoes of being a former number 1 overall selection. And we didn't see that as the game really progressed. Now, he started out strong. 6 of 6 on the first drive with a passer rating of 102.1. That first drive was pretty flawless for Caleb Williams and for Ben Johnson. So that first drive tells me a couple of things. One, Ben Johnson is not an issue, right? He's going to be just fine as a head coach just because his play calling is so good. Now, are all great play callers great head coaches? No. That is not the case by any stretch of the imagination. So could there perhaps be, culture issues for Chicago as time progresses? Could there be, physicality issues, discipline issues? All these things could still happen if you have an elite play caller as your head coach. So we'll see if Ben Johnson can shift through that. But I think there were some question marks on whether or not, Detroit just had some really nice pieces or if Ben Johnson truly was incredible. I think most people understood that Johnson was incredible, and I think he proved that in the game. Especially that first drive. So when Caleb Williams is on script, right, NFL coaches and play callers, of course, script out, the beginning parts of games. Once they're on script, the Bears are always going to be good in the beginning of the game. But as the game progressed, after that first drive, Williams was 15 of 29 with a 79.5 passer rating. And that means he's only completing about 50% of his throws, which obviously is not good enough. So when they got further off the script, the more Williams struggled, and I think what was so noteworthy about it was the visible frustration that Ben Johnson showed as Caleb Williams was struggling, particularly early in that second half, right? That first drive where they came out of halftime, and it looked like Johnson had some really nice plays caught up with open receivers, and Williams was not able to get the ball to those receivers. And I think that's certainly something that Williams needs to get better at, right? He's got the rocket for an arm. He's a great athlete, but just sometimes he has some layups that he's not able to convert on. And obviously, if you're going to be a competent / good quarterback in the National Football League, you can't miss layups, right? Tom Brady, he didn't miss layups. If the guy was wide open, he hit him. Joe Burrow, he doesn't miss layups, right? Guy's wide open, he hits him. If it's a screen pass, he hits him if they're open, right? And you saw some easy misses there from Caleb Williams, which certainly was noteworthy. But Johnson, look, it's a guy that in the preseason, Tyson Bagent had a passer rating of like 107, right? Now, yeah, it's the preseason, right? Defenses aren't scheming up against the offenses. I understand that. But the fact that Ben Johnson had Tyson Bagent playing at that level shows me that Ben Johnson has the ability to be a good head coach in the National Football League. And also, when he was with Detroit, remember, there was several cycles where people were wanting Ben Johnson to come in from interviews. Maybe he would take those interviews, but he opted for, I believe, 2 years where he had interest as far as being an NFL head coach. He opted to stay in Detroit. Obviously, they were winning a lot of games. He thought they could kind of take that next step and could compete for a world championship. Obviously, that did not end up happening as they kind of collapsed there against a really good young Commanders team in the first round of the playoffs last season. But point being, it's not a Ben Johnson issue. We're one game in, but I'm ready to say that Ben Johnson, he's going to be just fine. But is Caleb Williams going to be just fine? That I have question marks with. If I am a Chicago Bear fan, I am very concerned with where Caleb Williams is at. Some of the stuff as far as, handling things at the line of scrimmage, that doesn't appear to be as clean as it should going into year 2, right? Some of the stuff where, at some points, quarterbacks are just going to have to overcome, right? You can only be on script for so long. At some points late in the game, you're going to have to make some throws. And when McCarthy and the Vikings were making their comeback in the fourth quarter, the Bears offense just kind of went stagnant, right? It wasn't able to do anything. And I think Johnson put him in some easy spots where he could have some easy throws that he wasn't able to execute on. So, I felt like when Chicago had the first overall pick, it was one of those situations where I didn't love Caleb Williams, but it felt like just the raw talent that he had, what he had put on tape throughout his collegiate career, and the ceiling that he has, you had to take him. I was kind of in the boat where it's like, I don't know if it's going to work, but I feel like you kind of have to take him, especially with all the turmoil in Chicago. If they would have taken a different guy and it hadn't worked out and Williams had gone on to be some great quarterback, I mean, the city would have never, lived that down, right? That would have been something that was talked about forever. So they had to go with that pick. Obviously, Jaden Daniels right now in that draft looks like he is the significantly better quarterback as far as Caleb Williams goes. But I feel like they had to make that move. I have questions on whether or not it's going to work, and especially after week 1 against Minnesota, I really have some reservations as far as where Caleb Williams can take this. I feel like the operation, right? Having control at the line of scrimmage, checking into the right plays, that's stuff you're supposed to see as you go from year 1 to year 2, and he still kind of looked a little bit like a deer in the headlights there. I get it. It's a new system with Ben Johnson. It's a very complex system, but, you see Caleb Williams, not to sit here and question his work ethic or what have you, but you see him, out having a good time from time to time. And, when really he needs to be doing everything he can to master the offense. It's got to be frustrating, too, if you're the Bears, because if he can do that and understand, situationally what he needs to do, read defenses a little bit better, understand the play clock, how long he has, if he needs to make a check, he's got enough time to do that, he doesn't have enough time to do that, needs to call a timeout, what have you. All those things are some things that you should be able to figure out after you have played as much football as he has. He played a ton of football in college, right? And then he played, obviously, all of last year, and I think there were still some question marks in that area that were a little bit concerning if you're the Chicago Bears. All right, let's flip it to the other side and J.J. McCarthy and the Minnesota Vikings. Going through that draft of quarterbacks, it was interesting trying to figure out, who was going to have success, who wasn't. And so much in this league is all about fit, right? Obviously, quarterback is the most important piece to an organization in the National Football League. But that next important piece, in my opinion, is the head coach. And then beyond that, I think it's, ownership, the kind of team and the kind of culture that you have around the head coach and, of course, the quarterback. And Minnesota is in a spot where they check off a ton of boxes. They got a really good GM who just signed an extension, right? They have Kevin O'Connell, who, people in NFL circles think that he is that guy, right? Lots of people have called him the tall Sean McVay, right? He, of course, came from that McVay tree, spent a lot of time there, has been with, McVay, and has seemingly just gotten better each year since he's been with Minnesota. Kirk Cousins, really good NFL quarterback. Is he a Super Bowl guy? No. Is he going to have great postseason success? No. He's a really good quarterback. Kevin O'Connell made him look really good there for a while, right? Sam Darnold, a guy that, was a former high pick when he was drafted several years ago, and then kind of had been a guy that was just bouncing around, trying to find a home, what have you. Sam Darnold made himself a lot of money with how he played last year, thanks to Kevin O'Connell. So Kevin O'Connell is an outstanding head coach, so that's why I think McCarthy has a chance here. And that defense is incredible as well. They fly around. They make plays, hyper-aggressive defense there in Minnesota. I think Brian Flores, I touched on this earlier, I think you could sit there and actually make the argument that he is the best defensive coordinator in the National Football League. It's very exotic. What he shows you one thing pre-snap. He switches. He's got guys in crazy spots. He brings pressure. He does a really nice job of keeping the opposing offense off balance, which – to Caleb Williams, back to Caleb Williams real quick, he's not going to have to face anything that complex until he faces Minnesota once again. So don't want to completely be banging on Caleb Williams there. But organizationally, they check a lot of boxes. Great culture. They've got Justin Jefferson, right, who's the second best wide receiver in the National Football League. So there's a lot of pieces around J.J. McCarthy that can help him be successful. I still, even after the fourth quarter comeback, I'm not expecting him to do that. Maybe he'll shut me up, and in a couple of weeks they'll be undefeated, and he'll be playing great football. And that fourth quarter he had, that's how he'll play throughout the entirety of games. I don't think so. But The first 3 quarters, he looked like a guy that hadn't played football in, 600 days, whatever the number is exactly. That certainly is true. He looked like kind of a deer in the headlights, right? He looked overwhelmed. And, what I thought was really interesting, and it kind of speaks to, O'Connell's brilliance, is they would always cut over to the sideline, and he was just so calm, right? Even when that offense was not moving the ball at all and McCarthy looked horrible, O'Connell was very calm. He said after the game that he saw McCarthy at halftime, looked him in the eye, and was like, "You're going to be the reason we win this football game." Said he loved what he got back from McCarthy. And ultimately, that's what ended up happening in that game. J.J. McCarthy, the first 3 quarters, was 7 of 12 with a passer rating of 35.4. That is absolutely horrible. And then the fourth quarter, he was 6 of 8 with a passer rating of over 101, with 3 total touchdowns, 2 throwing and 1 rushing. All the touchdowns were impressive. The one over the middle to Justin Jefferson, really was just cut loose by J.J. McCarthy. And I think that you saw him start to throw with a little bit more confidence, right? It looked like he was kind of guiding balls a little bit early, just being hesitant before just cutting it loose. And then something clicked. There was a play when they really started to get things going where he just hit Jefferson there on the sideline, and he was open, but he just ripped it in there. And then you saw, later on that drive, the touchdown pass. Both the touchdown passes were really good. And he does have the ability to get to outside the pocket and, make some moves with his feet. It looks like his teammates have bought into him. If you saw some of the footage from after the game in the locker room, I think his teammates were pretty fired up about what he was doing out there on the football field, how he closed that game for the Minnesota Vikings. So, maybe I'm banging on him too much. He's in a great spot. Appears to, have his head screwed on properly and, have a good head on his shoulders. But, McCarthy, I still have some reservations as far as what he can do in the National Football League. But Minnesota, they're 1-0 and definitely a team that we will continue to monitor and talk about as the season progresses. So that is the Monday night game. Wanted to spend some time talking about that. I know a lot of people are interested in that game. Really, we had some great games in Week 1 of the National Football League, and we'll turn the page a little bit more towards Week 2 tomorrow. Obviously, I have a Thursday night game that we'll preview and spend some time talking about. But, the Sunday night game and the Monday night game, 2 incredible comebacks, close at the end of the game, and, both teams, obviously, in terms of the Buffalo Bills and, of course, the Minnesota Vikings able to come out on top at an incredible Week 1 of the NFL season. And that's just the nature of the NFL, right? It seemingly delivers each and every year. All right, I promised some Reds conversation. Went a little bit out of order here. But I do want to spend some time talking about the Cincinnati Reds. Look, the Reds are in a spot where they're not completely dead right now as we sit here on Wednesday, September 10th. Still have some games left as they progress throughout September. Obviously have the rubber match tonight against the San Diego Padres. And if they win that game, that'll really catch my attention as far as what I believe they could do as far as perhaps making the National League playoffs. I think, last night's game, as Trace talked about on Off the Bench, you won the game. There was some aspects of the game throughout the game that kind of were like, well, that's the issues that they've had all season long. But they got clutch hits. Tyler Stevenson, 9th inning, 2 outs, delivers a 2-run bomb. You had home runs earlier in the game as well. You got good pitching, something you've had for much of the year. And you're able to come out on top in that game, and then you cut it to 3 games, right? The Mets are just trying to let you back into this thing. Now the Giants, of course, are a factor. The Giants are ahead of you. So now as a Reds fan, you're, not just thinking about the Mets. You also have to think about the Giants. But if you win today, we'll see what happens with the Mets and the Giants. But you win today, and then you have 3 games in Oakland, right? Oakland, for their standards, are a much better baseball team this year than they have been in recent memory, but they're several games under 500, 66-80 is their record right here as I look at it. So they're much better than they have been, but it's a series that you need to win. It's a series that even if you were a little bit more eliminated from the postseason than you are right now, you should win that series anyway. So based on where Cincinnati is, especially if they can pick up a win tonight, I'm looking at them getting 2 out of 3 at minimum against the Oakland Athletics. Not quite the Oakland Athletics. We won't really get into that, but the Athletics, we'll say, right? And then you finish with the division, right? You get the Cardinals, Cubs, Pirates, who you've struggled against for whatever reason this year, and then the Brewers, who absolutely own you. Very, very interesting, right? I think as I look at this Reds team, you don't necessarily have a lot of confidence, right, in what they can do. You feel really good about the pitchers that you have out there on the bump. Abbott going tonight, love Andrew Abbott. We'll see exactly how he throws. As it gets later in the year, you have some question marks about Andrew Abbott. You've seen that the past couple of years, right? As he kind of wears down a little bit this time of year, but we'll see how he performs tonight. You're just trying to put yourself as an organization where you have a chance going into that Brewers series. Really, just have a chance, right? That's what this team is looking for at this point. My expectation for the Cincinnati Reds coming into this season was make the playoffs. That was my expectation. And, with the new manager, Terry Francona, I thought that was, it was at the end of this year, if they miss the playoffs, I'm going to say failure. And if they make the playoffs, even if they get blasted immediately, I'm going to say success. And that was kind of my mindset coming into this year. We'll see if that actually happens. That just kind of fell over out of nowhere, but we'll keep it pushing here. But with the Cincinnati Reds, I think people need to understand one thing, and that's that you have to understand that you have to get more bats on this team, right? What they have done offensively certainly has not been up to snuff whatsoever, and that's really what's held back your team to this point. We're just fighting with the microphone here. Anybody else see that? That's all right. We'll keep pushing. As I kind of lose track of what I'm saying there. But, really, as you talk about just needing those bats to wake up, right, and needing to have somebody that can really step up and deliver those clutch hits, right? As much as I've watched the team this year, my biggest takeaway is, man, it would be so good to have Joey Votto on this team. Not the Joey Votto that we saw recently, right, but the Joey Votto of a couple of years ago, how good that would be to have him on this team, right? Joey Votto always delivered in the clutch. He had the ability to hit the ball the other way and, of course, hit the ball over the fence as well. And that's something that this team has really, really struggled with. If you had, I don't even mean prime Votto, if you had Votto of a couple of years ago on this team, I think they're in a position where they have won more games and they're probably more in the race than they are at this point. As you look around, the team is built right on defense and pitching. Is that going to win in the age of Major League Baseball right now? I don't think so. Right? Kyle Schwarber has 50 home runs. Reds fans want to bring him in free agency. He's going to make so much money. Unfortunately, they're not going to be able to bring him in. But if you just need to find a way to add that bat this offseason, and the Reds, haven't shown that they've had the ability to do that over the course of the past few offseasons, and it is what it is in that regard. But still holding on to some hope that they perhaps can get this thing turned around and finish strong, right, and put themselves in a position going into that Milwaukee series to have a chance. I think the Cardinals, they've just had your number for several years. Right, for whatever reason. They're just a really well put together team, despite the fact that, that you're not looking at the St. Louis Cardinals as a team that is a contender, right? The Reds, of course, are above the Cardinals right now. Could they be a team that makes a run and squeaks in? I don't know. We'll see. Crazy things happen in baseball this time of year, but that series obviously is going to be really, really important for the Cincinnati Reds, and we'll have more Reds conversation here on the show as we progress, and if the Reds stay alive, we certainly will be talking about them on the show as well. All right, back to football here. Let's talk about the San Francisco 49ers. Brock Purdy is a guy that he got paid this offseason, and I think the 49ers did a really good job with his contract, right? They didn't just put him in a spot where, they made him the highest paid quarterback in the National Football League, right? For whatever reason, that continues to happen in the NFL, as you have these quarterbacks who don't necessarily have a great season, but it's just like, it's their time for them to get paid, so we're going to make them the highest paid quarterback in the National Football League. I don't understand that for the life of me, right? Like Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson, they should be the highest paid quarterbacks. They're the best ones, but it doesn't always work like that for whatever reason. So I think, the Niners, John Lynch, Jed York, they did a nice job with his contract, not just making him the highest paid guy. And I think his contract, it kind of fits the value that he has, right? Obviously, he's Mr. Irrelevant, that last, pick of the draft when he was drafted a couple of years ago for the San Francisco 49ers. But, he's banged up, right? He's got the toe injury, and he also has a left shoulder injury. So his status for this game against the New Orleans Saints is currently up in the air right now for Brock Purdy. And, that's just kind of the nature of the San Francisco 49ers at this point, right? They just are really banged up. They're an older team. They're more of a brittle team. And George Kittle certainly is a guy that, he's been placed on IR now. He's going to be out for a while. Trent Williams, he was in and out of the tent this past game against Seattle. So the biggest question mark with Brock Purdy was, okay, when he's surrounded by greatness, he can distribute the football and put you in a spot where you can win the game. And obviously they were a player or two away from winning the Super Bowl a couple of years ago against Kansas City when that game goes to overtime. But now, as things shift, right, you pay your quarterback. You're not going to be able to have as much skill around Brock Purdy as he is used to, right? Christian McCaffrey, he continues to get older, right? He's coming off an injury, and he, I believe, had the most touches out of any running back in week 1, which that's got to give you a little pause for concern if you're the Niners, right? You don't just want to be feeding him, especially this early, just constantly, right? Because he, of course, has the injury history. He's a running back. He's going to be getting in a car crash on every single play. So things are starting to deteriorate and erode around Brock Purdy. What is he going to be able to do? Is he going to be able to rise above that and put San Francisco in a spot where they're still competing? Or is he going to kind of fall off and, kind of be the guy that everybody said he was, right? That guy that was drafted in the 7th round that really, isn't a great quarterback, but just has the ability to kind of manage the game, right? Game manager. That's a conversation for a different day, but people always use the term game manager and, they use it like it's a bad thing, but at the end of the day, that's what you want your quarterback to do, right? You want him to manage the game. You want him to make the throws that he needs to make and go from there, but that's kind of, like I said, a conversation for a different day. But Brock Purdy, he's got the toe, he's got the shoulder, and, this is a tough guy, right? He went to Iowa State. I remember watching him at Iowa State. I absolutely loved what he was able to do at Iowa State. I was really impressed with his career there. And when he got drafted last, it was a bit of a surprise to me. Not that I think he was going to be some really good starter NFL quarterback, no. But he's just a gamer. And he's a tough kid, right? He got hit a lot at Iowa State. And he took some shots in that Seattle game, and he's banged up. And I'm expecting him to play Sunday against the New Orleans Saints. We'll see if he does or if he does not. But then the question is, if he doesn't, you have Mac Jones, which this to me is very, very interesting. I always was a Mac Jones guy. I think the season that he had in 2020 at the University of Alabama is really one of the most underrated college football seasons that anybody has had at the quarterback position. I think a lot of ways, and this sounds crazy to say, but I think in a lot of ways it was even more impressive than what Burrow was able to do in 2019. If you look back and you look at the numbers and you look how dominant that Alabama team in 2020 was, you're going to see some incredible stuff from Mac Jones. And he was incredibly accurate with the football. He played on time. Granted, he had a lot of help around him, but I thought he was going to come into the NFL. I think he was going to be a star. No, but I thought he was going to be a middle-of-the-road starting quarterback in the NFL. And then he had that rookie year with the New England Patriots, right? Josh McDaniels was his guy, ends up making the Pro Bowl. People joke about that, right? If, guys hadn't opted out of the Pro Bowl, he wouldn't have been a Pro Bowler. I understand that. But and then things really went south after that rookie year, right? Bill Belichick decided, we're going to put a defensive coordinator at offensive coordinator because that'll be a good idea. And there was just a lot of turmoil. Belichick, Jones, they weren't on the same page. He got benched several times, and, obviously that was kind of a disaster how it ended. He was Lawrence's backup last year, got called into duty for a few games, wasn't very good, and now he lands here with the San Francisco 49ers. But if you remember back to that draft for the Niners a couple of years ago when they took Trey Lance, there was some discussion leading up to that draft about him perhaps not being the pick for the San Francisco 49ers and him or Mac Jones actually being the pick for Kyle Shanahan. Now you get to see that with Shanahan and Mac Jones paired together. It's crazy how that works. So we'll see. I think, again, I expect Purdy to play this week. He's tough. He's going to do everything he can to be out there. But if at some point we see Mac Jones for Kyle Shanahan and the San Francisco 49ers this year, that's going to be really, really interesting because the scheme that Shanahan runs is very similar to what Sark did at Alabama with Mac Jones when he had so much success. So, I think if he had some more help around him in New England, you would have seen Mac Jones, continue to take steps in the right direction. Shoot, maybe he's still the starter right now, and they don't even take Drake May. But based on, what happened and the coaching turnover and just didn't surround him with any skill pieces. And then obviously, not to just take all the blame off Mac, right? But he was in a spot where he was getting, very, very frustrated, didn't always seem to have the best attitude. He was moody, he was pouty, right? He was kicking, tripping players, right? Doing things that he shouldn't have been doing. But, if the Niners have to go with him this week, I will be very interested to see how he plays in that game. Because, really, people really talked about him and Kyle Shanahan being that partnership, and now they have it here as he is the backup in San Francisco. Also, Seattle, who, of course, lost the game against San Francisco. They shouldn't – if Sam Darnold doesn't bump into his own teammate, right, they don't lose that game, right? They win that game probably. But, that's the NFL. One play here or there dictates the outcome of the football game. And, I think that defense for Seattle really, really is incredible. They fly around for Mike Macdonald. Obviously, this is now going to be his second year as the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. They've got some really good pieces. They're, hyper-aggressive, running around. They can get after the quarterback, creating all types of chaos in the secondary. So Seattle is also a team in that division in the NFC West where, I think it's they're in a spot where they can compete. I thought they were going to win that game against San Francisco. They obviously did not end up doing that, but I think they're going to be able to be at the top of that division and compete with the Rams and the Niners and those teams as we progress throughout this NFL season. All right. Got about 10 minutes here left on the show. Appreciate everyone that has hung around. Got about 70 people in here hanging out with us. And sometimes, we will do this as we get near the show, as I continue to fight with my microphone, which is very interesting because I haven't had issues like this previously, and it literally just fell out of nowhere. And not exactly sure what's going on, but we're going to continue to fool with it a little bit here. Let's see if that's good. Good? How about that? And, we'll just answer some questions here in the comments to end today's show. Again, appreciate everyone for hanging out. Sean says, are you firing Day again, Ryan Day? Let's talk about Ryan Day a little bit here because I've been tough on Ryan Day. I considered him as a guy that, he always has these great rosters, and he wasn't able to deliver and win the big games for Ohio State. But obviously that changed last year. If he loses that game against Tennessee, there's a real chance he gets fired. I know people, Ross Bjork, the AD, was, not saying that was going to be a situation. He was saying that, they have all the trust in the world in Ryan Day, what have you. But if he loses that Tennessee game, that was a big game in Ryan Day's career. And the run, obviously, he has been on since then has been really second to none. And you can just see the confidence that he has when he talks now. He just feels, actually confident. Before, it felt like he was trying to fake his confidence a little bit, right, because he knew that he couldn't really get over the hump and win that big game. But, Ryan Day, his spot is secure as the head coach of Ohio State. Obviously, Ohio State fans, they'll be, all upset if they lose to Michigan again. But even if he loses to Michigan, he's not going anywhere. He is going to be here for the long term. All he needed was that national title to get him in that spot where he could have some job security, and he got it. And, he's going to be the guy for a long time. Alex is in the comments. He's a Michigan fan. He says, crying Day. Michigan has their number right now, and I'm certainly not convinced that Ohio State is going to be able to win that game. They have the much better team. In my opinion, they have the much better quarterback. Maybe that's a hot take. I don't think it is. But, it's the boogeyman for Ryan Day, and Ohio State is Michigan. So we'll definitely be spending a lot of time talking about that in a couple of weeks when that game comes. Alex also said, I'm not sold on Sharon. I think it was kind of when Harbaugh left, it's kind of a no-brainer to go with Sharon. You had the success when Sharon had stepped in for Harbaugh. That's not always the best practice, right, when you're bringing in a new coach to just develop from within, right? A lot of times you need to look elsewhere to get the best possible candidate. I kind of go back and forth on that. Sometimes it's like, well, someone's leaving. We want to keep the continuity of the team that was in place previously, right? And, sometimes it's like, well, maybe that's not the best position, right? For example, the Lions offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, leaves. They kind of just promote some guy that's been in the organization for a long time, a lot of people like. He's in his 50s. Yeah, we'll give him the job. Well, is he really the best guy for the job? And I think you're kind of in a similar situation there if you're talking about Sharon Moore there as well. And we'll see. Obviously they lost last week. But if he continues to beat Ohio State, obviously is going to remain the guy. But as far as where Michigan is and where Ohio State is, Ohio State's certainly in a much better spot right now, in my opinion. If you got any more comments or questions, let me know in the comment section. Here's a good one. Whose long-term stock are you buying, J.J. McCarthy or Caleb Williams? Good question. From Mouse Cop. From a skill perspective, it's Caleb, right? Obviously, knowing what he can do on the football field with his arm, his ability to extend, make plays, is really, really impressive. But JJ's in a spot where he's really surrounded by a lot of greatness, as we kind of talked about earlier in the show. So if I had to pick one, I probably would say Caleb, just because of the talent and just because of the belief that I have in Ben Johnson. But there's lots of cause for concern if you are a Chicago Bear fan, if you're a Caleb Williams fan, based on what you saw in Monday night against the Minnesota Vikings. But answer definitely for me at this point would be Caleb Williams. Alex says, where do you rank USF? Yeah, good question there as well. Obviously USF just had a big win in the Swamp. They beat Florida. They're a feisty team, man. They're a really tough physical team. I know Alabama played them twice in recent years, and they gave Alabama some fits, right? They play really, really hard. They play together. They play collectively as a unit. They're really well disciplined there as well. So I don't know exactly where I would rank them. Obviously, they deserve to be ranked after going on the road and beating Florida, but I think a lot of people are considering them to be a potential college football playoff team, and how could you not, based on how they have started the season? 2 really dominant wins for them, and certainly a team that more people are going to be talking about if they continue to string together that success. But obviously, after a really big win going on the road in the Swamp, there can be a letdown week as the next game comes. So once they get into their conference play and we see how they play in those games, then I think we'll have a better idea of how exactly we can evaluate them. Tasden says, who is your favorite player on the U.S. men's national team? It's got to be Pulisic, right? I think that's I'm not going to sit here and act like I am a soccer guy by any stretch of the imagination, but I would say Pulisic would probably be that guy. He was kind of that Captain America guy for you, right? Your last World Cup, he was sacrificing his body, making crazy plays, putting his body on the line. So not a big soccer guy by any stretch of the imagination. Obviously, we have a podcast here at Chatterbox, The Flying Lion. Lots of exciting things going on with FC Cincinnati right now, but that is not my strong suit by any stretch of the imagination. Got a couple of more minutes here if you want to get any more questions in the comment section. Again, appreciate all of you guys for hanging out. Again, it's a little bit difficult as we get going here, and it's just me, right? Because I got to do some things on the fly while also trying to talk about what it is we were talking about at this point, but keep the comments coming. Smelliot says, are the Bearcats winning the Big 12 this year? No, they're not. I think you've seen some good things maybe from Cincinnati this year. There were elements of the Nebraska game where it was like, okay, there's a little improvement there, but not to just bang on Scott Satterfield. The coaching search, how it was handled, I don't think it was executed well, and now you're kind of stuck with Satterfield, at least, for the short term. Don't think he's the guy. I don't think he's the answer. Don't want to put all the blame on him, right? There's lots of elements of the team that cause issues, right? I definitely don't think he's the guy. I think a lot of people share that same sentiment. And, I just think, even against Bowling Green, you win the game, right? But, it's a MAC opponent. You should have handled that game a little bit better than you did. But, unfortunately, that was not the case. So I'm pulling for UC, right? I'm a Cincinnati guy. People that live here in Cincinnati and don't pull for them, I don't understand that. I have a tough time understanding that. But, my confidence level is not necessarily very high at this point. Alex says, did you see the worst Big 12 job? That's the thing. I don't think it's a bad job. It was just surprising to me that they weren't able to get a better candidate in. I don't know if they were pushing all their chips on the table hoping to get Deion Sanders and they didn't get him, and then it was like, oh, we're in trouble, we'll just hire Scott Satterfield. I don't know how real or how close they were to getting Deion. I know there was a lot of rumors before he took the Colorado job that Cincinnati was interested, and he may or may not have been interested in Cincinnati as well. But just that coaching search really was not executed as well as I think it needed to be. All right, so we'll do that from time to time at the end of shows. If we had some closing thoughts or what have you, that we'll just ask some questions, get a little interactive with the chat. Again, it's a little bit difficult without a producer to try to do multiple things at once, but I do think you guys are showing your support here, hanging out with us at the show. 75 people watching the whole time. That does mean a lot, and I want to show my appreciation for you guys as well. And we'll do a little engagement there towards the end of some shows if we have some time, and look forward to continue to doing that. So that'll do it for this edition of the Stone Shield Show. Hopefully we get the mic figured out tomorrow. I think we got it stabilized here for now, but there'll be more videos up on our YouTube page. If you missed any of the show, we'll have some clips that go out later today, so be on the lookout for that. Also some clips from Off the Bench as well. Make sure you guys give me a follow on Twitter if you haven't done so already, at @StoneShields_. Certainly would appreciate that, as well as we'll have lots of our content posted on my Twitter page there. Additionally, again, very much in the beginning stages here, but I think we've had a quality 3 days here to this point, and I certainly appreciate all of your support. And we will catch you tomorrow, same time. No Off the Bench tomorrow, but we will be on at 11 o'clock in the morning, and look forward to seeing you then. Until then, take care, everybody.